We'll start off with a little bit of history. Back in 2015, I purchased a SportDog In-Ground Fence system after doing a lot of research online. Rented this bad boy here at the Ditch Witch at my local box store, dug a trench all the way around my yard, laid the wire into that trench, buried it, then hooked up my transmitter. The dog that I had at the time was extremely smart. It got shocked one time, never left the yard, never has since. Fast forward to 2022, now I have a new dog. She loves to play in the yard, but she also likes to leave the yard, so I think it's about time to dust off this old system and put it to use. But there was one issue. The transmitter no longer worked, so I had to get a new one, got it from Amazon, it arrived. Thought I was ready to go at that point, but nope, had one more issue. The collar had the original battery still in it, so it had corroded and was almost impossible to remove from the connector, and in trying to do so, I ripped the connector. So now we have an issue. I thought I was going to go ahead and just buy a replacement collar, but after seeing the prices, nope. I'm going to try to fix this one. So I went to Amazon, found some connectors. I think it was 10 for $5, and I'm going to figure out how to solder this thing together. So since I've never soldered anything, I don't have any of the equipment. So I went to Harbor Freight, ended up looking at a solder gun. It was 30 bucks, but I ended up going with the solder iron, mainly because it was $5, and this may just be a one-time use type thing. I also bought some lead-free solder, a heat gun, and some heat shrink. I then watched a few YouTube videos on how to solder wires together, and now I think I'm ready to give it a try. So here's everything that we're going to be working with today, and I'll go ahead and get all this stuff out of the packaging real quick. Now I want to go ahead and give a quick test run or test fit on these. Very easy to put together, but it was just as hard to take this off as it was on the original that I had the problem with. The only issue was the other one had corrosion on it, and it was also very old, so the pieces snapped off. But I'm not sure how these connectors didn't snap off either. So for the first step in this process, we're going to go ahead and cut this old connector off. We're going to leave as much wire as possible. Now from the get-go, I noticed that these wires had a very thin gauge. This set of wire strippers that I had didn't even have a gauge that went that low, or at least that hole that it was made for. It was not doing the job. So I had to pull out the old trusty Pittsburghs. You can get those from Harbor Freight, and they did a much better job. Now on these 9-volt connectors that you get from Amazon, they give you plenty of wire, so you got to cut them to length. There's not a whole lot of room in this box, so I got to cut them kind of short, which is going to make it hard when the soldering process starts, but it is what it is. So now we have everything stripped, and I also bought some heat shrink and a heat gun like I mentioned earlier, but the smallest piece of heat shrink in the sorted box that I got was too big, so we'll just have to use electrical tape. So what we'll do now is plug up our soldering iron, get some safety glasses on because that solder can pop up. You do not want that to get in your eye. And then we'll do a process called tinning tinning the tip or tinning the soldering iron. Basically what that is getting a thin layer of solder on the tip, and that way it works a little better. And we'll get a little practice on these test pieces. The YouTube video I watched on how to solder was a Chris Fix video, and he had a few great explanations on how to start off connecting these wires. The issue here is that the gauge is so thin, I don't have a lot of strands to work with, so I really couldn't follow that, but I'll pop up a few pictures here because he did have some good suggestions. The test pieces are together, so I think I figured out that part. Now let's try to test out this soldering iron and the solder. Keep in mind, this is my first time. Let's see how it goes. Alright, for my first time, I think this went very well. These pieces are really together. I gave them a few pretty hard tugs and they were not coming apart. One thing that I'm going to have to keep in mind when I start on my actual collar is my soldering iron hit the wire back there, so I melted some of the plastic. I do not want to do that because it could cause shorts. So my test pieces were really long, and then they also weren't attached to anything, so they were easy to work with. Now that I'm actually working on this collar, I wish I would have bought a pair of helping hands. Would may have made this a little bit easier. So with this being the first time that I've ever done any soldering, I didn't really understand how long I need to hold the tip onto the wire to heat it up, because the purpose is you want to heat the wire up and let it melt the solder instead of touching the solder to the tip. I think that's called a cold solder, but in the case this wire gauge was so thin, I think most of the time I ended up touching the tip to be able to get it to melt. So if you have any tips on this as you watch this video, you leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And right there, I'd got a tiny bit of solder to stick, and I think I would have been okay right there, but I tried to do it a little bit more, and I actually melted that solder right off the wire. Alright, I think I'm going to call it a day here. It doesn't look as good as the test pieces did, but if you give this thing a tug, it's on there pretty firm. So I think it's going to do what we need it to do. I'm going to throw some tape on there and finish it up and see if this thing works. Not 100% happy with this tape job. I'm also not 100% happy with the solder job, but if this thing works and serves its purpose, then I'm okay with it. Alright, now for the moment of truth. Once I get this cap off, if I press this button, I should get some blinking indicators. Alright. Seems as though we fixed it, guys. If you happen to watch this entire video, please leave a comment down below and let me know. And also think about liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I have other kind of random videos of fixing stuff up around the house. And also I'll have a video upcoming where I put this dog collar to use.